I still remember the smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint scent of hope that lingered in the small hospital I used to volunteer at. I was 19, standing in the corner of a crowded ward, holding a patient's hand as the doctors rushed by. That moment changed me. I wasn't from a wealthy family. We lived in a small 2-room house on the edge of the city. My father worked long hours at a factory. My mother stitched clothes for neighbors. Money was always tight, but dreams? Dreams were free. From that day forward, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a place where people could walk in without fear, where care wasn't measured in money, but in kindness. A clinic, my clinic, a place built not with riches, but with purpose. When I first shared that dream with my family, they laughed. My brother smirked. You? A clinic? You can't even afford textbooks. My mother didn't mean to be cruel, but her words cut deep. Beta, dreams are for people who already have something. We barely survive. Be realistic. But something inside me refused to die. Every insult, every doubt, it only fueled me more. I started saving coins, skipping meals, working part-time after school. Anything to get closer to that dream. While others went out on weekends, I was in the library reading about healthcare systems, business models, and basic medicine. I had no mentor, no guidance, just a stubborn heart that wouldn't give up. Still, the more I worked, the more my family mocked me. They thought I was wasting my youth on an impossible fantasy. Whenever I spoke about my plans, someone would roll their eyes or change the topic. To them, I wasn't chasing a dream. I was running from reality. I'd often stare at my reflection late at night, whispering to myself, "One day they'll see. One day I'll build it." It wasn't about proving them wrong, not at first. It was about proving to myself that hope, when mixed with hard work, can create something extraordinary. There were nights when I broke down, when the numbers didn't add up, when I felt small and unseen, when even my closest people doubted my worth. But each time I thought of quitting, I remembered that patient's hand, trembling, cold, but filled with faith. That image became my strength. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself that someday, that clinic would exist, even if I had to build it brick by brick all alone. And that's exactly what I did. But back then, I had no idea that the same people who mocked my dream would one day fight to claim it as their own. They say success looks beautiful from the outside, but no one talks about the nights it nearly breaks you. For years, my life was a blur of exhaustion and quiet determination. Days began before sunrise and ended long after midnight. While my friends were posting pictures from parties, I was standing behind a cafe counter, pouring coffee with trembling hands just to afford my next textbook. I remember those nights vividly, the hiss of the electric kettle, the stale taste of instant noodles that became my only dinner. Sometimes I'd sit by the window of my rented room, watching city lights fade, whispering to myself, "Just hold on. One more day." But one more day turned into years. My first bank loan was rejected, 3 times. They said I was too young, too risky, no financial backing. One officer even laughed and said, "You think you can build a clinic with that face? Go get a real job." I walked out of that building with a fake smile, but inside I was shattered. To pay for my medical training, I worked double shifts, mornings at the pharmacy, nights at the small local clinic. Sometimes I'd fall asleep on the bus, missing my stop, waking up miles away from home. But I didn't complain, because I knew what I was fighting for. My hands would shake from fatigue, but my heart, it refused to slow down. Still, the loneliness, it was heavy. My family rarely called anymore. When they did, it was only to ask, "How much money have you wasted now?" To them, my dream wasn't noble, it was embarrassing. Relatives whispered that I was stubborn, that I'd thrown away my future. During family gatherings, they'd talk about everyone else's achievements. But when it came to me, silence. Not pride. Not even disappointment. Just silence. Like I didn't exist. I tried to ignore it, but it hurt deeply. You can pretend you're fine, but when the people who should believe in you turn their backs, every victory feels empty. There were nights I broke down, clutching my chest, wondering if it was all worth it. I'd look at the bills stacked on the table, the unpaid rent, the rejected applications, and think, maybe they're right. Maybe I am a fool, but then I'd remember why I started, that promise I made to myself years ago, the image of that frightened patient whose eyes once begged for help. And every single time I felt like giving up, that image would pull me back from the edge. I told myself, if I stop now, no one will ever believe it could have been done. So I pushed harder. More shifts, less sleep, fewer friends, more sacrifice. I sold my phone, pawned my watch, skipped meals, all to save a few extra rupees for clinic equipment. Each penny felt sacred, a step closer to something the world thought I'd never achieve. And slowly, painfully, I began to see tiny cracks of light in the darkness. A small local sponsor noticed my dedication. He didn't offer much, just a little financial support and a lot of encouragement. But that was enough to remind me that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't fighting a losing battle. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of something that would change everything. For me, and for those who once called me a failure. It happened on a morning that looked just like any other, gray, quiet, and uncertain. I was exhausted, sitting at a small bench outside the clinic where I worked part-time. My hands smelled like antiseptic. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. I was just tired of waiting, of hoping, of being invisible. That's when I met Dr. Rahman. He was an older physician, calm eyes, steady voice, and a way of looking at people that made you feel seen. He noticed me cleaning up the waiting area and said softly, "Do you always work this late?" I nodded, half embarrassed. He smiled and said something that still echoes in my mind. Hard work has a strange habit of being noticed, even when you think it isn't. That was the first spark. Over the next few months, he became the mentor I never knew I needed. He'd stay late after his shifts, teaching me not just medicine, but purpose. How healing was more about listening than diagnosing, more about compassion than prescriptions. He saw my sketches of clinic layouts, my notes filled with wild ideas and impossible budgets. And instead of laughing, he said, "You might just be crazy enough to make this work." One day, he introduced me to a small community investor, Mr. Kamal, a retired pharmacist who believed in funding young dreamers. He wasn't rich, but his heart was huge. After hearing my story, he said, "I can't give you much, but I'll help you get started. You remind me of who I was." That night, I sat on my tiny bed, staring at the small envelope he handed me. Not just with money, but with belief. It wasn't enough to build a full clinic, but it was enough to begin. Days turned into weeks of planning, sketching, searching for space. I rented a crumbling little building. One cracked wall, flickering tube lights, and an old signboard that still had another doctor's name on it. But to me it was sacred ground. I cleaned the floors myself, scrubbed every window, painted the walls with my own hands. My fingers blistered, my back ached, but every brushstroke whispered, "You're almost there." I borrowed used medical equipment, secondhand furniture, even repurposed wooden crates as cabinets. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was mine. The day I placed the clinic signboard outside, I stood there for a long time, letting the morning sun hit my face. Tears rolled down before I even realized it. For years, I'd dreamed of that moment. No applause, no crowd, no family. Just me, and the quiet sound of wind brushing against the new letters. The Healing Point Clinic. The first few weeks were slow. Barely a handful of patients came by. Some days, none at all. But then, one evening, a young mother rushed in, holding her sick child. The child had a high fever, trembling and crying softly. I treated him carefully, praying I'd get it right. After a while, his breathing steadied. His tiny fingers stopped shaking. The mother looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Thank you. No one else would see us." That moment, that simple "thank you," felt heavier than every insult I'd ever heard. It was like the universe whispering back, "See? You were right to hold on." When they left, I sat there alone in the quiet clinic, staring at the empty chairs. For the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. Something had changed inside me. All those nights of hunger, rejection, and ridicule suddenly made sense. The pain had a purpose. And for the first time, I felt that my dream wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was real. Little did I know. This new light, the one I fought so hard to find, would soon attract shadows I never expected. The morning sun had never looked brighter. It wasn't just light, it felt like approval. After years of sleepless nights, tears, and empty pockets, the day had finally come. The grand opening of my clinic. I stood outside the small glass door, holding a bunch of marigolds in one hand and my heartbeat in the other. A part of me still couldn't believe it was real. The signboard gleamed softly in the morning air. The Healing Point Clinic, where care comes first. My hands trembled as I turned the key and stepped inside. The air smelled of fresh paint, new beginnings, and quiet dreams finally fulfilled. Every corner of that place had a story, a scar, a sacrifice, a sleepless night behind it. There were no reporters, no guests, no photographers. Just me, and the echoes of everything I'd endured to get here. I had invited my family weeks before, sent them messages, called, even sent a formal printed card, but no one came. Not my mother, not my brother, not even a single cousin. At first, I told myself they were busy, but as the minutes turned to hours and the empty chairs stared back at me, the truth sank in. They simply didn't care. I forced a smile, cutting the red ribbon myself, whispering, "Congratulations, you did it." A few kind neighbors stopped by. Some former patients brought small gifts, flowers, chocolates, handwritten notes. Their kindness filled the room more than any applause ever could. But when the day ended and the lights dimmed, I sat alone on the clinic bench, staring at the empty doorway. The silence was both comforting and cruel. Pride swelled inside me. Yes, I had done what everyone said was impossible. But pride came with a strange ache, because the people I had hoped would be proud of me weren't even there to see it. I thought about all the times I'd imagined this day, cutting the ribbon with my family beside me, my mother smiling, my brother clapping my back saying, "You did it." Instead, there was only the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint echo of my own breathing. I closed my eyes and whispered to the empty room, "You didn't need their approval to get here, and you won't need it to move forward." That night, I locked up and walked home under a sky full of stars. For the first time in years, I felt free. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet unease began to grow. It was small, almost invisible, like a whisper carried by the wind, a sense that something was coming, something that would test every ounce of strength I had left. I didn't know it then, but that was the last peaceful night I'd have for a very long time. Success doesn't arrive with a warning. It just walks in one day, quietly, like it's been waiting all along. Months passed since the clinic opened. At first, it was just a few patients trickling in. Small cases, regular faces. But then, word began to spread. A mother told another mother. A teacher told her colleague. A local paper ran a small feature titled, "Young Doctor Builds Hope from Nothing." And suddenly, the Healing Point Clinic wasn't just another building on the street. It was the place people talked about. Patients started lining up outside before opening hours. I could barely catch my breath between appointments. For the first time, the sound of the waiting room chatter felt like music. Every tired morning, every night I'd spent doubting myself, it was finally paying off. And then, the phone started ringing. Not from patients, from family. It began with my mother's voice, soft, hesitant. "Beta, I saw your name in the paper. I told everyone, that's my child. I'm so proud." Her words should have filled me with joy. But instead I felt empty. Because where was that pride when I needed it most? The next day my brother called. "Hey, superstar." He laughed, pretending like nothing had ever happened. "Mom says the clinic's doing great. We should celebrate. It's all in the family after all, right?" In the family. That phrase stung more than any insult ever had. Soon, the calls became frequent. Cousins, uncles, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone suddenly remembered me. Everyone wanted to catch up. Some even stopped by the clinic with gifts and cameras, smiling like they'd been my biggest supporters since day one. One aunt even whispered, "We always knew you'd make it. You've got good blood. It runs in the family." I smiled politely, but inside, my heart burned. They didn't see the years of rejection, hunger, humiliation. They didn't see the tears on my loan papers or the nights I begged the universe for a single chance. They only saw the success and claimed it as theirs. They started saying things like, "We always told you medicine was in your destiny," or "We prayed for this to happen." No, they didn't pray for me. They gave up on me. I should have felt angry, but what I felt was worse, disappointment. Because a part of me still wanted their approval, even after all this time. That's the cruelest part about family. No matter how much they break you, you still want them to see your worth. I told myself maybe things could change. Maybe success could heal what failure had broken. So I let them back in. A few calls, a few visits, small smiles over tea. I didn't see it then, but that was my first mistake. Because where pride enters, greed soon follows. And my family's sudden love wasn't love at all. It was interest, wrapped in the disguise of affection. At first, it felt nice. The house was loud again. Laughter, clinking dishes, conversations that stretched into the night. My mother cooked my favorite meals. My brother joked about finally having a doctor in the family. And my aunts filled the living room with nostalgia. For a moment, it almost felt like the family I used to dream about. The one that stood beside me when I succeeded, instead of watching from a distance. Almost. But there was something off. The smiles felt rehearsed. The hugs lingered a little too long, like they were waiting for something in return. And the compliments? They had edges. "You've done so well for yourself," my uncle said one night, swirling his drink. "But of course you couldn't have done it without the strong roots of this family." My cousin chimed in, "Exactly. Success runs in our bloodline. You just carried the torch." Their words sounded warm, but the message underneath was cold and clear. "You owe us." It started subtly. A cousin asking if I could help out with her wedding bills. An uncle suggesting his son could learn the ropes at my clinic. Unpaid, of course, but with access to everything. My mother dropping hints that I should invest in a family home again. Something big. Something that showed our status. And then came the line that froze me. "You wouldn't have done this without family roots," my brother said with a smirk. "You should remember who raised you, who gave you your name." I smiled, pretending I didn't feel the knife twisting inside. Because how do you explain to people that the same roots they brag about were the ones that once tried to bury you? They called me stubborn when I chose my own path. They called me ungrateful when I left home. And now, when that same independence blooms into success, they call it family legacy. The dinners became more frequent. But so did the questions. How much do you make now? Do you pay taxes on all that? You must be saving a lot. Maybe help your brother start something too? Every visit felt less like family and more like a transaction. The warmth was gone. What remained was entitlement, smiling, dressed in tradition, calling itself love. And as I sat there, surrounded by the people who once watched me fall, I realized something terrifying. They hadn't come back to celebrate my success. They'd come back to claim it. It started so innocently, with a smile and a promise. My cousin, Adil, came to me one morning, sleeves rolled up, voice full of confidence. "Let me help you with management," he said. "You're working yourself to death. Family should have your back." And after months of juggling patients, paperwork, and sleepless nights, his offer felt like a relief. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that maybe, just maybe, my family was finally proud of me, not just interested in what I'd built. So I said yes. At first, everything seemed perfect. Adil handled the books, spoke politely to the staff, and made small improvements here and there. He even brought me coffee every morning, like a loyal right hand. But soon, the rhythm changed. Little things started to go wrong. A supplier called about an unpaid invoice, one I'd already signed off on. A nurse whispered that some patients had complained about extra fees they didn't understand. And when I checked the monthly statements, the numbers didn't add up. At first, I thought it was an accounting error, but the errors kept multiplying. Thousands missing, then tens of thousands. When I brought it up to Adil, he laughed it off. "Oh, come on. You think I'd steal from you? Maybe your staff's been up to something. You trust them too easily." His voice was calm, almost rehearsed, and somehow I found myself apologizing as to him. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. One late evening, I stayed behind after everyone left. I opened the accounts myself. Receipts, transfers, fake supplier entries. Every trail led back to one name, Adil's. I remember staring at the screen, my hands trembling, my throat dry. The cousin who'd promised to help me, the one who'd laughed at my late-night jokes, who called me brother in front of everyone, had been siphoning funds for months. And worse, he was blaming my staff to cover his tracks. 2 of my best employees had already quit, humiliated and accused of theft they never committed. The next morning, I confronted him, quietly in my office. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. "You think you own this place alone?" he said, smirking. "This is our success. You wouldn't be here without the family. You owe us." Those words, "you owe us," echoed through my mind like a curse. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at him, realizing how blind I'd been, how desperate I was to believe my family had changed. But betrayal doesn't always come with knives. Sometimes it comes with signatures, smiles, and the word help. And that day, sitting in my clinic, the place I built from nothing, I learned the hardest truth of all. Family can be your greatest pride. Or your quietest poison. Confronting Adil should have brought closure. Instead, it opened a door I wasn't ready for, one that led straight into the heart of my family's manipulation. When I exposed what he'd done, the missing money, the fake invoices, the proof, I expected outrage, shock, maybe even regret. But what I got instead was silence. And then blame. My mother was the first to speak. "Why are you making a scene? He's family," she said softly, as if I were the one destroying something sacred. My uncle shook his head in disappointment. "You've changed," he said. "You used to be humble. Now you think a few patients make you better than us? Better than them." That's what it always came down to. In that small, suffocating living room, surrounded by the very people I'd once begged for support, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about pride. And they couldn't stand that I'd built something without them. Every word they spoke chipped away at me. "You're ungrateful. You've forgotten your roots. You're tearing this family apart over a little money." I tried to stay calm, tried to explain, but no one wanted to listen. They twisted every truth, painted me as the villain, the selfish daughter who'd let success rot her heart. And for the first time in years, I felt small again. The same helplessness I'd felt when they laughed at my dreams. The same loneliness from those nights spent studying under a flickering bulb while they mocked my impossible ideas. It was happening all over again, only now the stakes were higher. Days passed, and the guilt started to sink in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had changed. Maybe chasing my dream had made me cold. The thought ate at me. I couldn't focus at work. I stopped sleeping. Every phone call from home made my chest tighten, because I knew it wouldn't be love on the other end. It would be blame. One night, sitting alone in my office, I broke down. The lights were off. The clinic was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat. I had spent years building this place, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. But at that moment, it all felt meaningless. Because what's success worth if it costs you your family? Tears blurred my vision as I whispered to myself, maybe I should just walk away. I meant it. I was ready to hand over everything, just to stop the constant fighting, the judgment, the guilt. But deep down, beneath the exhaustion and the heartbreak, something inside me whispered back, "Don't." This wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect, about truth, about not letting the people who abandoned me rewrite the story I fought to create. And that night, in the dim glow of my clinic's waiting room, I decided something. If they wanted a war over what I'd built, they were about to get one. For days after the confrontation, anger burned under my skin like a fever. But anger is a loud, messy thing, and I needed quiet. I needed clever. I needed a plan that would hurt exactly where it counted. Their lies. So I stopped yelling. I stopped pleading. I smiled when they smiled and listened when they talked, all the while pretending their words didn't cut me. Outwardly, I stepped back. Inwardly, I sharpened my focus. First, I built a small, careful team, not family, not anyone who owed me loyalty, but people who had already proved their integrity. An honest accountant who'd worked with me during the clinic's early days. A lawyer who believed in justice more than drama. 2 staff members I trusted with my life. I told them only what they needed to know. Secrecy became the first rule. Then I started gathering proof. Slow, simple, relentless. Bank statements. Supplier contracts, old receipts, emails that had been quietly deleted from shared accounts. I printed copies and stored them in a box at a rented locker far from home. Every page was a stitch in a net I planned to cast. I recorded conversations too, nothing staged, nothing illegal, just the truth caught in their own voices. They admitted things in the comfort of casual talk. They boasted over tea. They complained about taking what was owed. Those moments, captured plainly, carried more weight than any accusation I could make. I also quietly audited every aspect of the clinic's operations. I traced payments, matched invoices to deliveries, and visited suppliers myself. Where a deal had created phantom vendors, I found invoices that never matched any delivery. Where he claimed advance payments, I found duplicates and altered dates. Each discrepancy was a landmine waiting to be shown in bright daylight. Most importantly, I recorded how this betrayal had collateral damage. The staff who'd been accused, the patients who'd been overcharged, the community trust that had been weakened. I collected testimonies from patients who remembered odd extra fees and nurses who remembered being blamed. They didn't want drama. They wanted the truth. They wanted their names cleared. They wanted the clinic to be a place of care again. While I gathered evidence, I also protected the clinic's future. I tightened financial controls, moved accounts to a bank with stricter oversight, and limited access to sensitive files. I installed proper invoicing systems and hired a small auditing service to run surprise checks. If they wanted to keep digging their hands into the till, they would have to do it through a maze I built myself. All this took place while I wore the mask of calm. At family gatherings, I listened to their plans about joint investments and family shares. I nodded, praised the idea, and let them talk themselves into exposing their motives. The more they schemed, the more they revealed. The more comfortable they grew, the lazier their caution became. There were nights I replayed their faces in my head. The smirk when a deal talked about our share. The smug look when an uncle claimed the clinic was a family achievement. I used those memories to plan where to strike. Not how to hurt, but how to expose. I also learned patience. Real revenge is not a scream. It's a slow reveal. It's showing the world the difference between appearance and truth, and letting people decide who to believe. I wanted them to be stripped of the pretense of support, not humiliated for the sake of humiliation. Because that's cruel and small. I wanted justice. When the time came, I didn't burst in with accusations. I let the paperwork speak. The ledger lines, the bank transfers, the text messages, they were sharper than any speech. I let the community's voices rise, the patients, the nurses, the suppliers. I let the truth do what my words could not, land in the open, clear, and undeniable. And while I moved quietly, one other thing changed inside me. I stopped wanting revenge that left scars on my soul. I wanted something cleaner, accountability. I wanted the clinic to heal. I wanted the people who sought care to trust the place again. So I set the stage. I waited. I watched them dig their own hole. arrogance guiding their hands. They made careless mistakes. They celebrated small wins as if the prize was already theirs. They entered contracts in my name without authority. They signed checks with shaky hands, thinking no one would notice. Each misstep was a gift. By the time I was ready to act, I had a file thick enough to stand on. And I had something else nobody could take. The quiet, steady conviction that I had built what was mine not to spite them, but to serve people. One night, before I revealed everything, I walked through the clinic. I touched the examination table where the child with fever had once slept. I read a note a patient had left on the reception desk thanking me for listening. I felt the history of every sacrifice beneath my fingertips. They had taken their chances to regain what they'd never earned. I had taken mine to protect it. And when the day came for me to lay it all out, not with anger, but with clear evidence and calm voice, they would find themselves where I had once been, speechless, exposed and finally seen for what they truly were. It happened on a Sunday evening, the same day they'd chosen for what they called a family celebration. My uncle had insisted on it. "Let's all gather, talk about the future," he'd said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. They thought it was going to be another moment of control, another chance to pressure me into giving them a share of the clinic. But this time I came prepared. I arrived early. The dining hall was warm, filled with the smell of freshly cooked food and the hum of self-satisfied conversation. Adil was laughing loudly, telling everyone about his new management ideas. My aunt nodded proudly, as if she'd raised a prodigy. None of them noticed the small black folder I carried in my hand, thick with documents, statements, and printed screenshots. When everyone had gathered, plates filled, glasses raised, I stood up. "Before we talk about the future," I said, voice steady, "I think it's time we talk about the truth." The laughter faded. Adil's smile froze. I opened the folder and laid the first sheet on the table, a printout of bank transfers. "Here," I said quietly, "is where the clinic's profits went for the past 6 months." I slid another page forward. Receipts, forged supplier invoices, fake email confirmations. "And here," I continued, "is who signed them." You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Adil leaned forward, trying to sound confident. "This is ridiculous. Anyone could have made that up." I didn't argue. I simply reached into the folder again and pressed play on my phone. His voice filled the room, crystal clear. "She doesn't even check the accounts. It's easy money. Family deserves their cut." Gasps, whispers. My uncle's fork fell onto his plate. My mother covered her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't look at Adil. I didn't need to. I just kept talking. Calm, composed, precise. "These records," I said, "have already been reviewed by my lawyer and an independent auditor. Every transaction traces back to accounts you opened under fake company names. You stole not just from me, but from every person who trusted this clinic." Silence, cold, heavy silence. Adil stood up suddenly, voice shaking with anger. "You're tearing this family apart." I looked him in the eye. "No," I said softly. "You did that the moment you decided my success was yours to take." For a while, no one spoke. Then the reactions came, like waves crashing in every direction. My mother cried, torn between love and shame. My uncle denied everything, calling it a misunderstanding. Adil shouted that I'd framed him, that I'd planned this to embarrass them. But the evidence didn't care about opinions. Page after page, I laid their greed bare, the lies, the false promises, the manipulation. Each document was a mirror they couldn't look into. Finally, when the shouting died down, I said quietly, "I didn't come here to destroy you. I came here to end the lies, to protect what I built, with my own hands." No one moved. Even the lights seemed dimmer. And then, slowly, I gathered the papers, closed the folder, and looked around the table one last time. "For years I thought I needed your approval," I said. "I begged for your support, your pride, your love. But now I understand I don't need any of that, because I've finally learned the difference between family and people who share your last name." With that, I walked out, not in anger, not in victory, but in peace. Behind me, their voices blurred into silence. For the first time, the burden of proving myself was gone. I didn't destroy them. I simply revealed them. And in doing so, I reclaimed everything they tried to take. Not just my clinic, but my dignity. That night, as I locked the clinic door and stood under the streetlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I always imagined revenge as a roar, something that would make the world notice. But what I wanted wasn't noise. I wanted truth to move like a quiet tide, steady and unstoppable, until the shoreline changed. After the exposure, the first thing I did was protect the clinic, not for my pride, but for the people who trusted us. I called my lawyer, handed over the folder, and let the wheels of accountability begin to turn. Legal papers were drawn up with careful hands. Injunctions were filed, access rights revoked. It was clinical in the truest sense, precise, methodical, without theatrics. Adil's name was removed from the management roster the same week. The fake vendor accounts were frozen. The bank placed holds on suspicious transfers. When the auditors traced the missing funds, every transaction pointed back to the same patterns I'd studied for months. Evidence is merciless in its honesty. It doesn't care for stories, only facts. Word spread quickly. Not through gossip, but through records. Police reports, auditor statements, official notices. The community that had once praised my clinic for its kindness now watched as the truth unfolded in documents and formal letters. People I had helped came forward, quietly supporting what was right. Nurses who had been accused returned, their heads held higher. Patients signed statements clearing names and confirming what had really happened. It stung to see the people who'd once laughed at my choices now pleading in private rooms. Adil tried to bargain, offered apologies that felt rehearsed, promises to pay back what he'd taken, tears that did little to touch the ledger on the table. My uncle called relatives, trying to patch the cracks with charm and excuses. But you can't charm a signature or explain away altered invoices. They lost the shallow security of their pretenses first. Invitations dried up. Social circles that had once been eager to share a proud story suddenly avoided the awkwardness of association. Where there had been loud support, there was only stony silence. It was a small justice. The people who loved trophies more than truth learned what emptiness their trophies carried. The legal consequences moved at their own pace. Criminal complaints were filed. Civil suits were prepared. A local mediator tried to arrange a private settlement to keep things in the family. I refused, not out of spite, but because letting this slide would teach the next person that theft disguised by bloodline goes unpunished. I wanted a precedent, not cruelty, but clarity. When the courts became involved, the truth could no longer be argued away over tea. Paperwork and testimonies carried more weight than loud denials. Adil faced charges. Some relatives were subpoenaed. The judge's gaze was steady, not interested in family drama, only in the facts. In that sterile room, their excuses sounded small. Financially, they could try to repay what they'd taken, and a few did. Not out of remorse, but because the consequences were unavoidable. But money returned cannot mend broken trust. Pride, once honest, is impossible to fake. They lost that easy pride that comes from claiming another's work without earning it. I watched as my cousin's bravado unraveled into shame. People who once sat at the heads of tables now kept their distance. They begged some to speak on their behalf. Those people refused. It was painful to watch. I hadn't wanted their downfall. I wanted my clinic to run without thieves. But seeing them face the consequences of greed felt like the air clearing after a storm. Meanwhile, the clinic began to heal. Patients walked through the doors with renewed faith. Staff returned cautiously at first, then with quiet smiles. We implemented transparent financial systems, community oversight committees, and stricter hiring checks so that no one could exploit goodwill again. I made it clear that this clinic served people first, and that included protecting it from those who treated it like an ATM. Adil and the others tried to salvage their image in the press, short apologies, vague promises, a few staged charity appearances, but trust, once broken, is a slow thing. The community remembered who had been there when it mattered, and who had only come when it shone. Their attempts at salvage felt hollow next to the facts laid bare in court documents and public statements. There was a strange mercy in how it played out. The worst punishment for them wasn't a headline or a courtroom sentence alone. It was the dismantling of the comfortable lie they had been living. The lie that blood excuses everything. The lie that success can be claimed without the scars that come from building it. They had to look at themselves, really look, and decide if they could live with what they'd done. Many could not. For me, reclaiming control was not an act of triumph so much as an act of responsibility. I re-signed contracts in my name, rehired loyal staff, and reopened accounts with clear oversight. I instituted monthly public reports for the community so that transparency would be the clinic's default. These weren't revenge trophies. They were repairs. At the end of it all, what I carried away wasn't a sense of victory over family. It was relief. Not because I'd won a battle, but because the place I had built to heal others was no longer a hiding place for greed. The community that once doubted me now stood beside me, not out of obligation, but because they trusted that the clinic would be run with honesty and care. They faced the reality of what greed costs: quiet relationships, easy respect, the comfortable status of false pride. And though some tried to return, their apologies could not rebuild the nights I had spent hungry and hopeful, nor could they mend the years of silence. Sometimes justice doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it simply unfolds in the right order: truth, accountability, and then slow, steady repair. That's the kind of justice I wanted. The kind that healed rather than destroyed, that protected the vulnerable instead of punishing them for the greed of others. The storm is over. The noise, the lies, the betrayals, all fade into a distant hum. Your clinic stands taller than ever, filled with people who believe in your purpose, not your downfall. The walls that once echoed with exhaustion now carry the quiet rhythm of healing and gratitude. Patients smile. Your team trusts you. For the first time, peace feels real. Your family? They keep their distance, not out of pride, but out of shame. You hear your name whispered in family gatherings, wrapped in regret and what-ifs. They tell others, "We always knew they'd make it," but you know the truth, and that truth no longer hurts. You've built something that no betrayal could destroy, not just a clinic, but a life carved from resilience. And as you lock the doors each night, the silence around you isn't lonely anymore. It's earned. Looking back, I realize I never built this out of revenge. Not really. It began with love. A love for my dream, for healing, for family. But greed, their greed, tried to twist it into something dark. And yet I refused to let bitterness own me. I built everything with love, not greed. That's something they'll never understand. And maybe that's the real victory. Because success built on hate crumbles. But success built on purpose lasts. In the end, I didn't just build a clinic. I built myself. And the peace I have now, that's the kind of wealth no one can steal.